For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths. When I was reviewing the proposed scriptures for Laity Sunday, this one jumped out at me, since it speaks to new and radical developments in modern society. What would Paul think about the itching ears we have today? Social media has created filter bubbles and echo chambers where you can hear only what you want and believe whatever you choose, regardless of facts and reality. But for the church, the latest outbreak of itching ears began in 1990. That's according to Derek Thompson of The Atlantic. His article, published last month, was headlined, "3 decades ago, America lost its religion. Why?" He provides a chart showing the rise of the religious unaffiliated, whose percentages in the U.S. population was steady across the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the 6 to 8% range, but climbs rapidly over the next 3 decades up to 23%. He interviews Kristen Smith, a sociology and religion professor at the University of Notre Dame, who cites 3 historical events that drove this increase. 1, the association of the Republican Party with the Christian right. Politics drove God from the public square. 2, the end of the Cold War. The godless evil empire was no more. Atheism was freed from its association with our country's primary threat. 3, 9/11. The general idea here is that the attacks eventually gave weight to the argument that religions, all of them, are inherently destructive. Do we need them in a modern society? There are other factors mentioned. The erosion of trust in many institutions, such as Congress, the banks, the Catholic Church with its scandals, the declining number of 2-parent households, and, as I referenced earlier, the rise of the internet. He closes his article on a melancholic note. I quote, "The deeper question is whether the sudden loss of religion has social consequences for Americans who opt out. Secular Americans who are familiar with the ways that traditional faiths have betrayed modern liberalism may not have examined how organized religion has historically offered solution to their modern existential anxieties. Making friends as an adult without a weekly congregation is hard. Establishing a weekend routine to soothe Sunday afternoon nerves is hard. Reconciling the overwhelming sense of life's importance with the universe's ostensible indifference to human suffering is hard." And in his concluding remarks, although belief in God is no panacea for these problems, religion is more than a theism. It is a bundle, a theory of the world, a community, a social identity, a means of finding peace and purpose, and a weekly routine. Those, like me, who have largely rejected this package deal often find themselves shopping a la carte for meaning, community, and routine to fill a faith-shaped void. Their politics is a religion. Their work is a religion. Their spin class is a church. And not looking at their phone for several consecutive hours is a Sabbath. End quote. He seems to suggest that these replacements provide people with little to no comfort for the itching ears that drove them from the faith community. This portion of Paul's letter to Timothy also has a sense of melancholy. Paul wrote it near the end of his life. He knew his work was ending and that the ministry would have to continue through others. The itching ears he mentions, they are inevitable. People will turn away from sound doctrine. He offers no cure for the afflicted, only advice on Timothy for how to react. Be sober, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, carry out your ministry fully. Okay, let me offer my cure, or at least some hope. On the last Sunday of the first month of 2018, January 28th, our church had a visitor named George Parks. George writes a blog called Pillars and Foundations. he describes the blog as a project to explore and experience the services of many different churches, predominantly near where he lives in Massachusetts. He notes, quote, "The institutions are important, often overlooked, and even misjudged centers of our communities that seek to make a positive impact on their participants as well as others through their generosity and public service." His visit to our church was his 5th visit as part of this project. He has continued visiting places of worship, posting 60 more times to date. Here's a summary of what he wrote about our church. FUMC Melrose has many resources available to both educate and allow for participation in activities to foster racial justice. There is a United Methodist women's group through the church which participates in various charitable and social causes. Other activities the church participates in includes, but is not limited to, a crayon collection drive to help collect supplies for schools in need, the Bikes Not Bombs Project, which benefits various developing nations, supporting the Bread of Life ministry in Malden, which provides food to those in need, and food pantry donations to the Pantry of Hope, which serves Melrose. Included in the service pamphlets were references to congregation members being involved in charity work in Puerto Rico because of the recent hurricane, as well as for economic strife in Haiti. Several congregation members were planning to travel to Israel in the immediate future for a religious-based learning experience. His conclusion: First United Methodist Church of Melrose is yet another incredibly impactful organization that touches its community in many ways. It fosters charity both within the local community but also across the globe. It educates its congregation on the troubles experienced by others less fortunate and encourages positive activism. It should serve as an inspiration to many so that they cannot take for granted the positive change in the world that they can contribute to. I feel seen. I am proud that he received a clear and accurate understanding of our church community in his visit. And his writing directed me to a cure for itching ears. I think the cure for their itching ears is in our own ears. I think the best treatment for itching ears is listening. Listening to the needs of the community, the nation, the world. People may turn away from the church, but our church will not turn away from them. A church that listens to the concerns of its community will remain relevant to its members and its neighbors. A church that opens its ministry to these concerns will maintain a vibrancy. It will provide that necessary impact in its community that George Parks and Derek Thompson both described in their writing. In preparing this sermon, I was thinking about all the issues that have been discussed in this space. Understanding Islam, the transgender experience, facts about family separation, workshops on racial justice, vigils for New Zealand and other places that have suffered gun violence. In some instances, we sponsor the events. In others, we simply provide meeting space. In all, we should listen. And I believe we do. I am proud that the community knows they can come to us with their concerns. We have listened in setting our fundraising goals, understanding Bikes Not Bombs and its local and international impact. For Haiti, this has led to careful consideration of how the money raised is spent. We ensure that the money will be a positive addition to Durocher, that it will be spent in the local economy and pay local laborers. For Bread of Life, it can be the opposite. When Tom Feigley from Bread of Life spoke here in February 2016, he noted there were times that Bread of Life took immediate action in launching a service. They acted before the planning or funding was in place. They had to. I think it's safe to say that this church has complete faith in Bread of Life. If they have to act, if that is what their listening informs them to do, they should, and we will support them. The passage of the traditional plan at the special session of the United Methodist Church's General Conference gave me itching ears. As Jim Bennett wrote in our statement to the community, the traditional plan is in direct opposition to the beliefs and actions of the First United Methodist Church. In 2012, our church voted for full and mindful inclusion of LGBT people into all aspects of our life, of our congregation, including marriage. And also from that letter, The example of Jesus Christ calls us to draw the circle of Christian community ever wider and to witness the operation of grace in the very lives of those LGBT persons who have traditionally been excluded from church communities and abused by Christians. We cannot remain silent and allow those who would perpetrate those abuses to presume to speak for us. End quote. You may see signs around the church about Epic Melrose. Parents of LGBTQ youth come here to learn and share. Bert Whittier and others got this program started, and some of the initial planning was discussed at meetings of MORE, Melrose Organizes for Real Equality. I was at those meetings. They were really careful in planning this group, knowing that for it to work, it required both privacy and openness. I was happy they would meet at our church. I knew there was no safer place in this city. So I was horrified when the global church betrayed the values of our local church. In the immediate aftermath of the vote, a group of church members met in the library to discuss our future. We listened to each other. A coalition of churches met online. We listened to each other. Members of this church provided much of the language of the New England Conference laity statement that was circulated in the spring. We put a banner up on our lawn denouncing the decision. Jane posted a photo of it on her Facebook page. That led to some discussion on the post. One was from her former colleague who worked with Doctors Without Borders on the front lines of the Ebola outbreak. She wrote, "I spend a lot of time in countries where people are devoutly Christian and where homophobia is increasingly being institutionalized in churches. The biggest problem from my vantage point is that there are almost no voices against homophobia. I think there is a huge amount of space at the global level for the churches to take on this issue in the way they did apartheid. It needs to be framed as a universal human rights issue to avoid being a Western versus Africa issue." End quote. While it currently seems improbable that the United Methodist Church could become a voice against homophobia, it is a goal that only a global church could enact. A few weeks ago, the Reconciling Ministry Network's Facebook page shared the news that FUMC Moheto in Kenya had voted to become a reconciling church, making it the first reconciling church in Africa. I now follow that church on Facebook and am inspired by their ministry. I am happy to have hope. We have big decisions ahead of us at every level. The global United Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church in America, in New England, and here in Melrose. So how do we act in this time of uncertainty? Be sober, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, carry out your ministry fully, listen, do not take for granted the positive change in the world that we can contribute to. Amen.